They called her the Limping Ghost. For 3 years, Evelyn Reed had haunted the corridors of St. Jude's General Hospital, a quiet, peripheral figure in shabby blue scrubs. She was the one who restocked the supply closets, changed the linens on empty gurneys, and mopped up spills no one else wanted to touch. Her world was a predictable rhythm of antiseptic smells, the distant chime of call buttons, and the soft, dragging scrape of her own left foot against the polished linoleum. They saw the limp, the tired lines etched around her pale blue eyes, the grey streaks in her tightly bound hair, and they dismissed her. A relic, a piece of old furniture that hadn't yet been thrown out. They didn't know about the sand-blasted air of Kandahar, the screaming whine of a Black Hawk's turbines, or the weight of a dying soldier in her arms. They didn't know the limp came from a piece of shrapnel that had torn through her femur, a souvenir from a mission so classified it didn't officially exist. They didn't expect that the quiet, raspy voice they so often ignored could cut through the cacophony of chaos with the authority of a thunderclap. Evelyn Reed wasn't just a burnt-out, aging nurse waiting for retirement. Evelyn Reed was a promise made in the heart of a firefight, a ghost of a different sort, a sleeping titan. And the day was coming when they would try to wake her. They would have no idea what they were about to unleash. The ER at St. Jude's was a finely tuned instrument of controlled chaos, and its conductor was Dr. Alistair Finch. Or so he believed. Finch moved through the emergency department not like a physician, but like a minor king surveying his fiefdom. His white coat was impossibly pristine, starched to a knife's edge. Beneath it, the sleeve of a bespoke shirt peeked out, ending at a wrist adorned with a Breitling watch that cost more than Evelyn's car. He was handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way, with a smile that never quite reached his cold, assessing eyes. His authority was absolute, built not on respect earned through competence, but on fear, cultivated through public humiliation and the constant, casual mention of his father's seat on the hospital board. "Reed, get over here," he barked, not bothering to look up from the chart he was scanning. His voice cut across the low hum of monitors and the quiet groans of patients. Evelyn, who had been methodically checking the expiration dates on a crash cart's intubation tray, turned without a word. Her limp seemed more pronounced under the harsh fluorescent lights, each step a small, painful effort. She moved with a practiced economy, her face a mask of placid neutrality. Finch gestured impatiently with a gold pen. "This floor is a disgrace. There's a coffee spill near bed 3. It's been there for 5 minutes.
Do I have to do everything myself?"
He didn't wait for an answer, his gaze flicking over her worn scrubs with theatrical disdain. "Honestly, Evelyn, I don't know why administration keeps you on. Your retirement party is at least a decade overdue. Clean it up." He tossed the chart onto the counter, the plastic cover clattering loudly. Nurse Jessica, a young sycophant who shadowed Finch like a pilot fish, giggled behind her hand. Evelyn's eyes, for a fraction of a second, lost their placid emptiness. A flicker of something hard and ancient, something forged in pressures far greater than a surgeon's ego, surfaced and was just as quickly suppressed. She simply nodded, her voice a low rasp. "Yes, doctor." She retrieved a mop and bucket from the janitor's closet, the familiar scent of bleach and ammonia, a strangely grounding presence. As she worked, she could hear Finch holding court at the nurse's station, his voice booming. "The problem with this place is a lack of standards," he declared to his audience of impressionable interns and fawning nurses. We're running a top-tier urban trauma center, not a rural clinic. We need precision. We need excellence. We need people who can keep up." His eyes slid pointedly towards Evelyn, who was now on her hands and knees, wiping the last of the dark stain from the floor. Not dead weight. A younger nurse, Sarah, who was charting vitals nearby, winced. She looked over at Evelyn, her expression a mixture of pity and shame. Sarah was new, still full of the earnest idealism that places like St. Jude's and men like Finch were determined to stamp out. She often tried to make small talk with Evelyn, offering to help her with heavier tasks, but the older woman always politely and firmly declined. There was a wall around Evelyn Reed, quiet and unbreachable. Later that afternoon, the ER's relative calm was shattered by the arrival of a high-speed MVC. A sports car, according to the paramedics, had wrapped itself around a highway pillar. The driver, a young man reeking of expensive cologne and cheap whiskey, was strapped to a backboard, his face a bloody mask. Finch sprang into action, not with the focused calm of a seasoned professional, but with the frantic energy of an actor playing a role. "Get me a full trauma panel. Type and cross. Hang 2 units of O-neg. I want a fast scan. Now. Page ortho, page neuro, page God himself if you have to, but move," he yelled. The team scrambled, a flurry of motion around the trauma bay. Finch shoved an intern out of the way to perform the fast scan himself, pressing the ultrasound probe against the patient's abdomen with dramatic flair. "No free fluid. Good. Good. His pressure is dropping, though. Let's push another liter of saline." Evelyn stood near the doorway, restocking the IV start kits. She watched the scene, not with the detached curiosity of a support staffer, but with the unnervingly still gaze of a predator. She saw the patient's distended neck veins. She saw the subtle, paradoxical movement of his chest wall. She heard the faint, almost inaudible dampening of his breath sounds on the left side. These were signs Finch, in his whirlwind of performative medicine, had completely missed. The patient didn't need more fluid. He was drowning in his own blood, his heart being crushed by the pressure building in his chest. Attention, pneumothorax. A simple diagnosis if you knew what to look for. A fatal one if you didn't. She saw Sarah notice it too. The young nurse's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to speak. "Dr. Finch, his trachea seems to be—" "Are you questioning my diagnosis, nurse?" Finch snapped without looking at her, his eyes glued to the monitor that showed the patient's blood pressure continuing to plummet. "He's hypervolemic from an internal bleed we haven't found yet. Push the fluid." Sarah shrank back, silenced. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She placed the last IV catheter into its slot, her knuckles white. She did nothing. It wasn't her place. It wasn't her fight. Not anymore. Another doctor, a senior resident, finally caught the tracheal deviation and called for a chest tube. They got it in just as the patient began to code. They brought him back, but precious minutes had been lost. Brain cells had died. All because the conductor was listening to his own applause instead of the music. Evelyn turned and walked away, the scrape of her foot a lonely, rhythmic counterpoint to the frantic beeping of the resuscitated man's heart monitor. She had learned long ago that some men could only learn lessons written in the blood of others. The next week, the humiliations escalated. It was as if Finch, sensing some unspoken judgment in Evelyn's quiet presence, felt the need to crush it. He found fault in everything she did. The supply carts were stocked too slowly. The floors weren't clean enough. He even berated her in front of a patient's family for taking too long to find a spare pillow. "My apologies, folks," he'd said with a saccharine smile. "Some of our staff are a bit past their prime. The family had looked at Evelyn with pity, which was somehow worse than Finch's contempt. During a particularly grueling Tuesday shift, Finch gathered the nursing staff for a performance review, which was little more than a platform for his own ego.
He stood before them,
Arms crossed, exuding an aura of smug superiority. "We had a near miss last week," he began, his eyes sweeping the room and landing inevitably on Evelyn, who stood near the back. "A simple tension pneumo, almost missed. This is what happens when we lose focus, when we get complacent." He conveniently omitted his own role in the debacle. "We need to be sharp. We need to be on top of our game, 24/7. Those who can't handle the pace will be replaced. This isn't a nursing home." Several nurses shifted uncomfortably. Jessica, however, smirked in Evelyn's direction. The poison had spread. Finch's attitude had given others license to treat Evelyn not as a colleague, but as an obstacle. They'd steal her assigned chair at the nurse's station. They'd accidentally knock over things she'd just organized. They'd speak about her in hushed tones as she limped past, the words old, slow, and useless hanging in the air. Sarah, the young nurse, was the sole exception. She saw the injustice, and it gnawed at her. That afternoon, she found Evelyn in the small, cramped break room, carefully eating a sandwich from a brown paper bag. The room was empty, as most of the staff preferred the bustling cafeteria. "Evelyn," Sarah began, her voice hesitant, Can I ask you something?" Evelyn looked up, her expression unreadable. She chewed slowly before swallowing. "You can ask." "Last week, with that car crash patient, you saw it, didn't you? The pneumothorax, before anyone else." Evelyn took a small sip of water from a plastic bottle. The silence stretched. "Dr. Finch is the attending physician. It's his patient." "But he was wrong. He almost killed that man." Sarah's voice was a passionate whisper. "You knew. I saw it on your face. Why didn't you say anything?" Evelyn's gaze drifted to the window, which looked out onto the concrete expanse of the ambulance bay. For a moment, her eyes seemed very far away, reflecting a sky Sarah couldn't see. A sky filled with dust and smoke. "Some warnings aren't meant to be spoken, Sarah. They're meant to be seen. If a commander can't read the signs in the battlefield, shouting at him won't make him a better leader. It will only make him shoot the messenger." The word commander hung in the air, oddly formal and out of place. Before Sarah could press further, Evelyn carefully folded her paper bag, placed it in the trash, and stood up, her joints protesting with a soft groan. "The linen closet on the 3rd floor needs restocking." She gave Sarah a small, sad smile. "Thank you for your concern, dear, but this is my place now. It's best you learn to accept it." She limped out of the room, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. The wall around the limping ghost was still there, but Sarah now saw a crack in it, and through that crack she glimpsed the shadow of a fortress. That evening, the hospital board held its annual fundraising gala. Finch, of course, was the star. He strutted around in a tuxedo, a glass of champagne in hand, charming donors and preening for the local news cameras. The hospital's PR team had crafted a narrative of him as a brilliant, life-saving maverick. Back in the ER, the skeleton crew dealt with the usual Friday night assortment of drunks and domestic disputes. Evelyn was tasked with cleaning and sterilizing the trauma bays after each use. As she meticulously wiped down a stainless steel instrument tray, she caught a glimpse of the gala on a television in the waiting room. There was Finch, his arm around a city councilwoman, laughing. The camera zoomed in on his face, radiating confidence and power. The screen reflected in the polished steel of the tray in her hands. For a moment, she saw two images superimposed: Finch's smiling face and her own reflection, tired and anonymous. Her hand tightened on the cleaning cloth. The metal of the tray was cold and unyielding, like a memory. A memory of another piece of steel, a surgical clamp, held steady in a shaking helicopter as she fought to stop a bleed, her own blood pooling on the floor beneath her. She closed her eyes, took a slow, deep breath that smelled of antiseptic, and continued to wipe. The anger was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, a sleeping thing. It was better to let it sleep. Saturday arrived with a vengeance. The sky, which had been a placid, indifferent blue, turned a bruised purple-gray by midday. A storm was rolling in off the coast, one of those furious late autumn squalls that turned the city's streets into treacherous rivers. The wind began to howl, rattling the thick plate-glass windows of the ER. Rain came down in sheets, blurring the world outside into a watercolor wash of flashing headlights and grey concrete. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Storms like this always meant a surge. The first calls started coming in around 3 p.m. A fender bender on the interstate,
A fall from a slippery ladder.
the usual. But then, the call came that changed everything. A dispatcher's voice, tight with stress, crackled over the radio. Mass casualty incident. I repeat, Maskell. Bridge collapse on the I-95 extension over the Industrial Canal. Multiple vehicles involved, reports of at least a dozen, maybe more, in the water. We are completely overwhelmed. The ER exploded into a state of high alert. Dr. Finch, who had just arrived for his shift looking slightly hungover from the previous night's gala, was immediately thrust into the center of the storm, both literally and figuratively. This was his moment. A chance to be the hero everyone already thought he was. "All right, listen up," he shouted, clapping his hands for attention. His voice was a little too loud, a little too shrill. "This is what we trained for. I want Trauma Bay 1, 2, and 3 prepped and ready. Sarah, get the Maskell triage tags. Jessica, coordinate with the blood bank. I want coolers of O-neg and plasma up here yesterday. Everyone else, clear the non-critical beds. Get them out, get them upstairs. I don't care where they go, just make room." The staff scrambled to obey, a whirlwind of organized panic. Evelyn, as usual, was on the periphery. She began methodically wheeling extra gurneys out from storage, her movements calm and deliberate amidst the rising tide of anxiety. Her limp was a steady, rhythmic beat in the heart of the chaos. She checked the oxygen tanks, ensuring each one was full. She laid out backboards. She did the small, vital, unseen things that kept the whole machine from grinding to a halt. Then, the first ambulances screamed up to the bay doors. The scene that followed was a nightmare tableau. Soaked, shivering, and bleeding people were wheeled in, their faces masks of shock and pain. A cacophony of groans, shouts, and the frantic beeping of monitors filled the air. The smell of rain, river water, and blood was thick and cloying. Finch was everywhere at once, a blur of white-coated motion. He directed triage with grand, sweeping gestures, barking orders. "This one, Bay 1, he's critical. That one, walking wounded, get her to the waiting area. Where's that chest tube I called for? Move, people, move!" But it was all performance. He wasn't managing the flow, he was just adding to the noise. Patients were being sent to bays that were already full. Vital equipment was being misplaced in the confusion. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently. They went out, plunging the ER into a terrifying, momentary darkness, then buzzed back to life, dimmer than before. The backup generator had kicked in, but it was struggling. Several secondary monitors and non-essential systems went dark. "Damn it!" Finch roared. "Get maintenance down here. I need my monitors." It was into this maelstrom that the critical patient arrived. The paramedics burst through the doors with a small, specialized gurney. On it was a child, a boy no older than 10. He was pale, soaked, and unconscious. A twisted piece of rebar, a metal spear from the collapsed bridge, was impaled clean through his right shoulder and chest. "VIP!" the lead paramedic yelled over the din. "This is Senator Thompson's son. He was in the limo that went over the side. We pulled him from the wreckage. BP is 80/40 and falling. Heart rate 150. SATs are in the low 80s and dropping." The air in the room seemed to shift. The pressure, already immense, became suffocating. All eyes turned to Finch, the senator's son. This wasn't just a patient, it was a career maker, or a career ender. Finch's face went pale. All his performative bravado evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked panic. "Get him into Bay 1, now!" he shrieked. They transferred the boy to the trauma bed. The main cardiac monitor above the bed, one of the systems that hadn't come back on after the power surge, remained stubbornly blank. "I need vitals. Someone get me a portable monitor." Sarah rushed to connect a rolling monitor, but as she fumbled with the leads, the boy's body gave a violent jerk. A seizure. His eyes rolled back. The portable monitor, finally connected, let out a single, deafening, continuous shriek. Asystole. Flatline. "He's coding!" someone screamed. Finch stared, frozen. The gold pen fell from his trembling fingers and clattered to the floor. All his textbook knowledge, all his rehearsed confidence, was useless in the face of this. The rebar complicated everything. He couldn't do compressions without dislodging it and causing a catastrophic bleed. He was paralyzed. The hero was a statue. The conductor was silent. The seconds ticked by, each one a nail in the child's coffin. And in the corner of the room, the limping ghost stopped stocking supplies. Evelyn Reed turned, and the look in her eyes was no longer neutral. It was the look of a commander assuming control of a compromised battlefield. The sleeping thing was awake. The high-pitched, unrelenting scream of the flatline tone was a physical force pressing down on the room, paralyzing everyone. Everyone but Evelyn. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She moved with a terrifying, preternatural calm that seemed to bend the chaos around her. The limp was gone. In its place was a gait of pure economic purpose, each step landing with the weight of absolute certainty. She crossed the 10 feet to the trauma bay in what felt like a single, fluid motion. Dr. Finch was standing over the boy, his hands hovering uselessly, his face a mask of waxy horror. "Charge the paddles! 200!" he stammered, finally finding his voice, spitting out a textbook response that was utterly wrong. "You don't shock asystole." Evelyn didn't break stride. She reached the bedside, and her hand, calloused and surprisingly strong, clamped down on Finch's forearm. "Belay that order," she said. Her voice was not the raspy whisper they were used to. It was a low, resonant command. A voice that had given orders over the roar of helicopter rotors and the crack of gunfire. It cut through the panic like a surgeon's scalpel. Finch flinched as if struck, turning to stare at her. "Reed, what the hell do you think you're doing? Get away from my patient." Evelyn's eyes, pale and cold as a winter sky, met his. "This is not your patient anymore," she stated, not as an argument, but as a fact. She released his arm and shoved him, not violently, but with an immovable force that sent him stumbling back a step. The room went dead silent, the only sound the horrifying drone of the monitor. Her attention was now entirely on the boy. Her hands moved with a speed and precision that defied her age, defied the weary persona she had worn for 3 years. One hand went to the boy's neck, fingers pressing against his carotid artery. Nothing. Her other hand gently palpated the area around the impaled rebar. Her gaze was intense, analytical. She was not seeing a senator's son. She was seeing a complex mechanical problem, a system on the verge of total failure. "His heart hasn't stopped," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "It's pulseless electrical activity, the monitor's reading artifact from the seizure. He has a massive tension pneumothorax, compounded by pericardial tamponade from the impalement. The pressure is crushing his heart. Shocking him will do nothing." She looked up, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the nurses and doctors. "I need a 14-gauge angiocath, a 10 cubic centimeter syringe filled with saline, and a full thoracotomy tray. Now, move!" For a heartbeat, nobody moved. They were frozen, caught between the world where Evelyn Reed was the limping ghost and this new, terrifying reality. Sarah was the first to break the spell. She spun on her heel and sprinted towards the crash cart, her hands flying to get the requested needle. "I said now!" Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip. The rest of the team jolted into action, their hospital training kicking in, overriding their disbelief. They moved to obey the quiet old nurse as if she were the chief of staff. Finch, recovering his footing, sputtered with rage. "A thoracotomy? In the ER? Are you insane? You'll kill him! You're just a nurse. Security! Get her out of here!" Evelyn ignored him completely. Sarah slapped the 14-gauge needle into her outstretched palm. Evelyn's fingers closed around it with a familiarity that was chilling. She didn't hesitate. She didn't measure. Her left thumb and forefinger found the second intercostal space in the mid-clavicular line, a landmark she could have located in complete darkness. "This is unauthorized. I am the attending physician here. I forbid this!" Finch shrieked, lunging forward.
Without looking up from her patient,
Evelyn's left arm shot out, not to strike, but to block. Her forearm met Finch's chest with the unyielding impact of a steel bar. He grunted, staggering back again, his eyes wide with shock at the raw, wiry strength in the old woman's arm. "Stay back," she commanded, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "or I will have you removed." Then, her focus returned to the boy. With a single decisive motion, she plunged the long needle into his chest. There was a soft pop as it punctured the pleura, followed by a distinct, forceful hiss. The sound of trapped air under immense pressure escaping the chest cavity. It was the sound of life. The boy's body shuddered once. The flatline tone on the monitor wavered. It broke, sputtering into a jagged, chaotic rhythm. A heartbeat, weak, but there. A collective gasp went through the room. They had just witnessed a medical miracle performed with a needle and an instinct that bordered on supernatural.
but Evelyn wasn't finished.
The rebar was still the primary problem. "Thoracotomy tray," she demanded, holding out her hand. A nurse slapped a sterile tray beside her. Evelyn's eyes scanned the instruments. Scalpel, forceps, rib spreaders. She picked up the scalpel. Finch looked on, his face a grotesque canvas of fury, disbelief, and terror. "You can't. You don't have the authority. You'll be arrested for assault." Evelyn finally turned her head and looked directly at him. The placid mask was gone forever. In its place was something harder than steel. For 3 years, I have watched you preen and posture while people suffered. I have watched your ego write prescriptions your skills couldn't fill. Tonight, that ends. Tonight, we save this child's life. You have 2 choices, doctor. You can assist, or you can get the hell out of my trauma bay. Her gaze flickered to the scalpel in her hand, then back to his face. It wasn't a threat. It was a medical observation. A tumor was about to be excised. The air in Trauma Bay 1 was thick enough to taste, a foul cocktail of fear, antiseptic, and ozone from the storm outside. Finch stood frozen, his face cycling through shades of crimson and ghostly white. The entire hierarchy of his world had been inverted in less than 60 seconds. The janitorial nurse, the limping ghost, was holding a scalpel and giving him orders, and the entire staff was looking at her for guidance. His authority, the very core of his identity, was hemorrhaging on the floor of his own ER. I am in charge here, he finally managed to choke out, his voice cracking. This is my hospital, my department. Nurse Jessica, call security. Have this woman removed. She is a danger to the patient. Jessica, who had been watching with a dropped jaw, fumbled for the phone at the nurse's station, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. But she never made the call. Evelyn didn't even look at Finch.
Her focus was absolute.
A laser beam fixed on the child on the table. Sarah, she said, her voice a low, urgent hum. I need you to bag him. Gentle, even breaths. 1 every 6 seconds. Watch his chest for rise and fall. Ignore the machines. Watch your patient. Sarah, her face pale but her hands steady, moved to the boy's head, the ambu bag in her hands. She squeezed, her eyes locked on the boy's chest. She had a new commander now. Evelyn held the scalpel poised over the boy's chest. Cracking a chest in the field is about speed, not elegance, she murmured, almost to herself, the words echoing from 1,000 other chaotic scenes. You have 90 seconds from the moment the heart stops before the brain starts to die. Our clock is ticking. Stop her! Finch screamed, his voice reaching a hysterical pitch. He took a clumsy step forward, intent on physically intervening. He never made it. A large hand clamped down on his shoulder.
It was one of the paramedics who had brought the boy in,
A big, burly man with a weathered face. I think you should let the lady work, Doc, the paramedic said, his voice a calm, deep rumble. His partner stood silently, blocking the other side of the doorway. They had seen enough in the field to recognize true competence when it stared them in the face. They weren't seeing a nurse. They were seeing a field medic of the highest caliber. Finch spun around. Unhand me! I'll have your job for this! The paramedic's grip tightened, his knuckles white. Maybe, but that kid on the table will be alive. Your call. Defeated, Finch could only watch in impotent fury. Evelyn made the incision, a long, swift cut along the 5th intercostal space. Her movements were brutally efficient, devoid of the hesitation that plagued even experienced surgeons in moments like this. There was no wasted motion. Cut, spread, expose. Blood welled, but she worked through it, her hands moving with an unnerving familiarity within the landscape of the human chest. Suction, she commanded. A nurse, shaking slightly, moved in with the suction tube. The complication arose then. As the ribs were spread, the jagged end of the rebar, which had been tenuously lodged in the pericardial sac, shifted. The weak, fluttering heartbeat on the monitor instantly devolved back into a chaotic, useless fibrillation. "He's in V-fib," Sarah cried out. "It nicked the right ventricle," Evelyn diagnosed instantly, her eyes peering into the bloody cavity. "I need internal paddles, and get me a satellite phone. There should be one in my locker. The code is 3619. The request was so bizarre, so out of place, that it stunned the room into another brief silence. A satellite phone? In her locker? Who was this woman? "Go!" Evelyn barked, and a terrified intern sprinted out of the bay. Finch saw his opening. A new wave of desperate, arrogant energy surged through him. "See? She's out of her depth. She's perforated the heart. She's killed him. I told you. This is what happens when you let a nurse play doctor." He was trying to reclaim the narrative, to cast himself as the voice of reason who had tried to stop the madness. Evelyn looked up from the open chest cavity, her face and scrubs spattered with the boy's blood. The look in her eyes was one of pure, undiluted contempt. "I haven't perforated anything, you incompetent fool. The rebar was unstable. This was an inevitable complication, one for which I am prepared, unlike you." She turned to the nurse holding the internal paddles. "Charge to 20 joules. The nurse complied, her hands trembling. The small, spoon-like paddles were handed to Evelyn. She placed them directly onto the surface of the boy's still quivering heart. The sight was primal, terrifying, and awe-inspiring. A human hand, holding the power of lightning, directly touching the engine of life. "Clear," she said, her voice steady. She pressed the discharge button. The boy's body arched on the table, the fibrillating muscle clenched into a single, hard knot, and then, miraculously, relaxed into a slow, steady rhythm. Sinus rhythm. A perfect, life-sustaining beat. A wave of audible relief washed through the room. Several people were openly weeping. Sarah looked at Evelyn with an expression of pure reverence. Just then, the intern returned, breathless, holding an old, battered-looking satellite phone. He handed it to Evelyn. She took it with her blood-stained gloves, punched in a number from memory, and put it to her ear. Her other hand remained inside the boy's chest cavity, her fingers gently stabilizing the damaged ventricle. "This is Angel 6, she said into the phone, her voice now completely devoid of any emotion except cold, hard professionalism. "I have a condition read. A pediatric patient, class Alpha priority. Impalement, right thoracic. I've performed a field thoracotomy and have stabilized a ventricular tear. The patient is viable, but requires immediate surgical extraction and transport. I am declaring a broken arrow protocol. I need a fully equipped surgical transport team at my location, St. Jude's General, immediately. Acknowledge." There was a squawk of static from the phone, then a clipped, professional voice on the other end. The words were unintelligible to everyone else in the room. Evelyn listened for a moment. "ETA, 10 minutes? Understood. Angel 6, out." She disconnected the call and tossed the phone onto a nearby tray. She looked at the paramedic, who was still restraining Finch. "You can let him go now." Then her eyes found Finch's. They were filled with a chilling, victorious calm. "Help is on the way, doctor. Real help." Finch stared at her, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Angel 6? Broken arrow. It was military jargon, but it sounded like something from a movie. What had she done? Who had she called? The storm raged outside, but a different, more terrifying storm was about to break right inside his emergency room. The 10 minutes that followed were the longest of Alastair Finch's life. They passed in a state of suspended animation. The ER, once a hub of frantic activity, had become unnervingly quiet. The Maskell event was still ongoing, but the epicenter of the universe had shrunk to the dimensions of Trauma Bay 1. Staff moved on tiptoe, speaking in hushed whispers, their eyes constantly flicking between the preternaturally calm woman with her hand inside a child's chest and the storm-lashed windows. Evelyn was a statue of command. She stood unmoving, her posture perfect despite the years of her supposed infirmity. Her fingers, with delicate, practiced pressure, were keeping the boy's heart beating. She issued quiet, precise orders. "Sarah, let's start him on a dopamine drip, 5 micrograms per kilogram per minute. Let's keep his pressure up. You," she pointed to a resident, "get me updated blood gas numbers every 5 minutes." They obeyed without question. They were her team now. Finch had stumbled back to the nurse's station, leaning against it for support. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion and dread. "Angel 6. It sounded like a call sign. "Broken Arrow." He vaguely recalled the term from a movie, a situation involving a lost nuclear weapon. But that couldn't be right. It had to be a bluff, a delusion. This crazy old woman was having a psychotic break, and she'd somehow cowed his entire staff into submission. He had to reassert control. He had to expose her. He straightened his back, trying to gather the shredded remnants of his dignity. "All right, that's enough of this fantasy," he announced, his voice thin and reedy. "Whatever game you're playing, it's over. I'm calling the police and having you arrested for assault and practicing medicine without a license." No one paid him any attention. It was as if he had become invisible. His words were swallowed by the tense silence, by the rhythmic squeeze and release of the ambu bag in Sarah's hands. Then, a new sound began to penetrate the ER. It started as a low, deep thrumming, a vibration felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. It was a sound that was fundamentally different from the city noises, different from the storm. It was a rhythmic, powerful beat that grew steadily louder, cutting through the wail of the wind and the drumming of the rain. Whoomp, 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 whoomp. Heads turned towards the windows. Through the sheets of rain, they saw it. A light. No, 5 lights descending in perfect formation. They weren't the familiar, friendly lights of a civilian medevac helicopter. These were menacing, focused beams cutting through the gloom, attached to monstrous, dark shapes. 5HH-60G. Pavehawk helicopters, painted in non-reflective black, materialized out of the storm like wraiths. They moved with a brutal, physics-defying grace, their massive rotor blades churning the rainy air into a vortex. They didn't land on the designated helipad on the roof. They descended into the hospital's main parking lot, a space designed for cars, not military aircraft. With terrifying precision, the lead helicopter settled onto the asphalt, its landing gear inches from a terrified security guard's hut. The other 4 took up sentinel positions, hovering low over the lot, their downdraft blasting parked cars, setting off a cacophony of alarms. The side door of the lead helicopter slid open before it had even fully touched down. Black ropes snaked down. From the hovering aircraft, figures in black tactical gear began to rappel, descending into the parking lot with practiced speed. They moved in fire teams, securing the perimeter, their weapons held in a low, ready position. The local police, who had just arrived to manage the bridge collapse traffic, could only stare, their own authority instantly rendered null and void. The main doors of the ER burst open, slamming against the walls. Two of the commandos, clad in black armor and helmets with night vision goggles, flipped up, entered first. They swept the room with their weapons, their movements economical and lethal. The ER staff froze, some dropping to the floor, others raising their hands. Behind them strode a man who radiated an aura of absolute command. He was a full colonel, his rank insignia stark against the black of his fatigues. His face was granite, carved by hard sun and harder decisions. He ignored the chaos, his eyes scanning the room until they found Trauma Bay 1. He strode directly towards it. He stopped at the threshold, his gaze taking in the scene. The boy on the table, the open chest, and the old woman in blood-soaked scrubs, her hands steady, her eyes calm. The colonel's entire demeanor changed. The hard-as-nails combat officer vanished, replaced by something else. Respect. Awe. He snapped to the most rigid position of attention Finch had ever seen. Angel 6, the colonel's voice was a low baritone, but it carried across the entire ER. We received your broken arrow signal. The surgical team is right behind me. The package is secure. Finch's blood ran cold. It was real. All of it. From behind the colonel, another figure emerged. He was older, in his late 60s, wearing a perfectly tailored service uniform that bristled with ribbons and stars. A 4-star general. His presence seemed to suck the very air out of the room. He walked with a slight limp, an echo of Evelyn's own. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, swept past the commandos, past the cowering staff, past Finch, and landed on Evelyn. A flicker of deep, personal recognition crossed his face. He walked to her side, his gaze gentle. He looked from her face to her steady hand, then down to her worn-out shoes and the leg that had caused her so much pain. "Evelyn," General Marcus Thorne said, his voice a gravelly rumble, thick with emotion. "God damn it, Evelyn, it's been too long." He looked at her leg. "That piece of Kandahar shrapnel still giving you hell?" Evelyn finally looked up, a faint, weary smile touching her lips for the first time. "It's a constant reminder, Marcus. Keeps me humble." Thorne let out a short, harsh laugh. "Humble? There's not a humble bone in your body, Colonel Reed. Never was." He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding Finch, who was trying to shrink into the wall. "Colonel, this man was giving you trouble?" The title hit the room like a physical blow. Colonel. Colonel Evelyn Reed. Finch felt his bladder weaken. The limping ghost wasn't a nurse. She was a colonel. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of the woman mopping his spilled coffee with the legendary title. The colonel of the tactical team answered for her. "General, sir, according to the hospital's security footage, which we've already accessed, this man, Dr. Alistair Finch, has been verbally and professionally abusing Colonel Reed for months. His final act before our arrival was to attempt to physically prevent her from rendering life-saving aid to the patient." He paused, his voice dripping with professional contempt. He referred to her as dead weight and a limping ghost, sir. General Thorne's face, which had been warm for Evelyn, transformed. It became a mask of cold, controlled fury. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. He took a slow step towards Dr. Finch. It was the most terrifying step Alistair Finch had ever witnessed. General Thorne moved with the deliberate, unhurried menace of a predator that knows its prey is cornered. Each footstep on the linoleum floor was a drumbeat of impending doom. His eyes, which had held such warmth for Evelyn, were now chips of ice. They locked onto Alistair Finch, and in that gaze, Finch saw the end of his world. "You are Dr. Alastair Finch?" Thorne's voice was deceptively soft, a low rumble that was more terrifying than any shout. He didn't wait for a reply. He was holding a tablet, handed to him by one of the commandos. His thumb swiped across the screen. "Let's review your performance, shall we, Doctor?" The honorific was a weapon, dripping with scorn. At 1542, you misdiagnosed a critical tension pneumothorax during a standard trauma intake, an error a first-year medical student should have avoided. At 1622, upon the arrival of a mass-scale event, you induced panic and confusion through theatrical and incompetent leadership. At 1635, faced with a pediatric patient in cardiac arrest, you froze. You ordered a procedure, defibrillation for asystole, that was not only incorrect, but would have wasted the final precious seconds of the child's life. Thorne took another step closer. Finch was visibly trembling, sweat beading on his forehead and trickling down his temples. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "And then," Thorne continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a venomous whisper, "you had the audacity to interfere. You attempted to physically assault a decorated officer of the United States Armed Forces while she was engaged in a life-saving procedure that was far beyond your own limited capabilities. You called her insane. You called her just a nurse. You, a man who plays doctor in an air-conditioned building, dared to question Colonel Evelyn Reed in her element." He looked up from the tablet. "Do you have any idea who you were speaking to?" Thorne's voice rose, not in volume, but in intensity. "That woman, the limping ghost you told to retire, is the single most decorated combat medic of her generation. She has performed more successful field surgeries in the back of burning helicopters than you have in a sterile OR. The limp that you mocked? She earned that pulling your patient's father out of a downed osprey under heavy enemy fire in the Korengal Valley, an act for which she was awarded the Medal of Honor." A collective, strangled gasp went through the room. Medal of Honor, the highest, most sacred award. Sarah stared, tears streaming down her face. Jessica looked like she was going to be physically sick. "The patient," Thorne gestured with his head towards the boy, where a new team of military surgeons in sterile gear were now seamlessly taking over from Evelyn, "is not just a senator's son. He is the son of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Colonel Reed, Angel 6, was his designated guardian angel, a promise his father extracted from her years ago should his family ever be in harm's way on her soil. She wasn't just on duty tonight, Doctor. She was activated." Finch finally found his voice, a pathetic, pleading whine. I didn't know. How could I have known? My father, he's on the board. He's Gerald Finch of Finch Industries." He was playing his last card, the one that had always worked before. Thorne laughed. It was a short, brutal, humorless sound. "Your father," he said, stepping so close their chests were almost touching, "is a man who builds luxury condos. I am a man who commands fleets of nuclear submarines and entire divisions of infantry. Your father is a line item on my budget. You have no more cards to play." He turned to the tactical team's colonel. "Colonel, place this man under provisional arrest for endangering a military asset and interfering with a federal operation." "No, please," Finch begged, tears now mixing with his sweat. "My career, my license, everything I've worked for." Thorne's face was granite. "Your career? Your career ended the moment you decided that your ego was more important than a patient's life. It was buried the moment you chose to humiliate a hero instead of learning from her. He leaned in, his voice a final, damning verdict. You didn't just fail as a doctor tonight, Finch. You failed as a human being. The general stepped back. Two of the commandos moved in. They didn't handle Finch gently. They grabbed his arms, yanked them behind his back, and secured them with thick zip ties. The sharp zip of the plastic cuffs was the loudest sound in the silent room.
My watch!
Finch shrieked as one of the commandos pulled his hands back, the face of his brightling scraping against the wall. "You're scratching my watch!" The commando glanced at the expensive timepiece, then at the general. Thorne gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The commando grabbed the watch, twisted it, and the expensive leather strap snapped. He let it fall to the floor, where it landed with a dull, pathetic clatter. "Walk," the commando ordered. They frog-marched the now sobbing Dr. Alastair Finch out of the trauma bay. They pushed him through the center of the ER, past the rows of his former colleagues. No one looked at him with admiration now. Their faces were a mixture of contempt, disgust, and shame. He had been their king, and they had just witnessed him being stripped bare, revealed as nothing more than a cowardly, incompetent child. As they shoved him out the main doors into the rain and flashing lights, a final, whimpering cry echoed back into the hospital. "My father will hear about this!" No one believed him. With Finch's poisonous presence excised, the atmosphere in the ER transformed. The military surgical team, a unit known as a Forward Surgical Team, or FST, worked with a silent, terrifying efficiency. They had brought their own equipment, advanced portable units that made St. Jude's top-of-the-line gear look like antiques. They erected a sterile field around the patient, right there in the middle of the trauma bay. They were a self-contained bubble of military-grade medical excellence, and their commanding officer was Colonel Evelyn Reed. She had shed her blood-soaked scrubs. One of the commandos had produced a set of clean, black tactical fatigues from a pack. She changed quickly in an adjoining office, and when she emerged, the transformation was complete. The limping ghost was gone forever. In her place stood a figure of immense authority. The fatigues fit her perfectly. She still limped, but now it was no longer a sign of weakness. It was a testament to survival. It was a part of the uniform. She stood beside the operating field, not scrubbed in, but observing, directing. Her voice was calm and low, a steadying presence for the surgeons. "Watch for reperfusion injury as you restore full flow to the ventricle. Let's have mannitol on standby." "Good seal on that suture line, Major. Nice work." Sarah watched from a distance, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adoration. She was witnessing her quiet, downtrodden colleague revealed as a living legend. It was like discovering the janitor was actually a king in disguise. After an hour of intense microscopic work, the lead surgeon, a major with intense eyes, looked up at Evelyn. "The ventricular tear is repaired, Colonel. Rebar is out. Vitals are stable and holding.
He's going to make it."
A wave of profound relief washed over Evelyn's face. The iron mask of command softened, revealing the deep, bone-weary exhaustion beneath. She nodded slowly. "Good. Prep him for transport. I want him at Walter Reed within the hour." "Yes, ma'am," the major said, his respect for her absolute. As the team began packaging the boy for the helicopter flight, General Thorne approached Evelyn. He held a small, velvet-lined box in his hand. "Evelyn," he began, his gravelly voice softer now, "the chairman sends his personal, eternal gratitude. He's already on his way to Walter Reed." Evelyn just nodded, her eyes still on the boy, watching as the team carefully transferred him to a specialized transport litter. "But this," Thorne continued, opening the box, "is from me, and from a grateful nation."
Again.
Inside the box, nestled on a bed of dark blue velvet, was the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military honor. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of your own life, above and beyond the call of duty. You saved this hospital. You saved that boy. You did it with no support, under enemy fire of a different kind." He took the medal from the box. The entire ER staff, who had been working quietly around the periphery of the military operation, stopped what they were doing. They turned to watch. The paramedics, the nurses, the residents, the security guards, all of them stood in silent tribute. Evelyn looked at the medal, then at Thorne. "Marcus, this isn't necessary." "The hell it isn't," he said gruffly. In front of everyone, General Marcus Thorne, one of the most powerful men in the U.S. military, gently pinned the medal to the front of Colonel Evelyn Reed's black tactical fatigues. He then took a step back and rendered a slow, perfect salute.
The tactical colonel
Snapped to attention and saluted. The major saluted. Every one of the commandos in the room, a dozen hardened warriors, turned to face her and brought their hands up in a unified, crisp salute. The silence was broken by a single person clapping. It was Sarah. Her hands, still trembling slightly, came together in applause. Then the big paramedic joined in. Then another nurse. Within seconds, the entire emergency department erupted in a thunderous, sustained, standing ovation. The sound washed over Evelyn, a wave of gratitude and respect so powerful it was a physical force. Jessica, the nurse who had mocked her, was clapping the loudest, tears of shame and admiration streaming down her face. Evelyn looked out at the sea of faces, her colleagues, the people who had ignored and dismissed her for 3 years. Her eyes, for the first time, were shining with unshed tears. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement.
Thorne leaned in close.
"I can have you reinstated by sunrise, Evelyn. Name your post. Director of Medicine at Walter Reed? A command position at CENTCOM? Anything you want. Just say the word." Evelyn's gaze drifted from the general's face to Sarah's, then swept across the chaotic, but now functional ER. She saw the fear and exhaustion on the young nurses' faces, but also a new spark of determination. She saw a place that had been poisoned by ego, a place that needed a true leader. Her battlefield had changed. She looked back at Thorne, a quiet, resolute strength settling in her eyes. I think I'm needed here, General," she said, her voice once again her own. "I think my work here is just getting started." 6 months later, St. Jude's General Hospital was unrecognizable. The change was not merely cosmetic, though there was plenty of that. A massive, anonymous donation, rumored to have come from a consortium of grateful military and government figures, had funded a complete overhaul of the emergency department. The old, flickering lights were gone, replaced with state-of-the-art LED panels that simulated natural daylight. The monitors were all new, the equipment top of the line. But the most significant change was not in the hardware, but in the leadership. The new wing of the hospital, housing the expanded trauma center, bore a name etched in polished brass above the main entrance. The Colonel Evelyn Reed, Critical Care Unit. And its director was Evelyn herself. She no longer wore shabby blue scrubs. Her daily uniform was a set of crisp, tailored grey scrubs with Dr. E. Reed, Director of Emergency Medicine, embroidered over the pocket. She had, at General Thorne's insistence, completed a civilian medical board equivalency program, a formality that took her all of a weekend to pass with perfect scores.
She was, officially and unofficially, in command.
Her limp remained, a constant companion. But no one saw it as a sign of weakness anymore. They saw it as a medal, a visible reminder of the quiet strength that walked their halls. When she walked through the ER, a hush didn't fall. Instead, the energy rose. Nurses and doctors straightened up, not in fear, but in a desire to meet the high standard she set, a standard not of ego, but of relentless competence and compassion. She was a demanding leader, but a fair one. She taught, she mentored, she led from the front. She was often found at a patient's bedside, not just directing, but doing, starting a difficult I-5, comforting a frightened family member, cleaning a wound with her own hands. She remembered what it was like to be invisible, and she made it her mission to see everyone. Sarah was her second in command, the new head nurse of the ER. The once timid, idealistic young woman had blossomed under Evelyn's mentorship into a confident, capable leader in her own right. She moved with a quiet authority that echoed her mentors, her eyes missing nothing. The sycophants, like Jessica, had either transferred out in shame or had undergone a genuine transformation, rededicating themselves to the profession with a newfound humility. The culture of fear was gone, replaced by a culture of excellence. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Evelyn stood in her office, which had a large window overlooking the ambulance bay. She was sipping a cup of coffee, watching the rhythmic dance of paramedics and nurses as a new patient was brought in. Sarah entered, holding a tablet. "The quarterly performance reports are in, Colonel," Sarah said. The honorific was a term of endearment and deep respect now, used only when they were in private. "And?" Evelyn asked, not turning from the window. "Patient outcomes are up 30%. Staff retention is at an all-time high. Patient satisfaction scores are the highest in the state," Sarah reported, a proud smile on her face. "We did it." "We did it," Evelyn corrected gently. She finally turned, her pale blue eyes warm. "You did it, Sarah. You and your team." A comfortable silence fell between them. Sarah then hesitated, a different expression on her face. "I saw something today. In the news." She swiped the tablet and handed it to Evelyn. The screen showed a grainy photo accompanying a short article from a local tabloid. The headline read, "Disgraced Doctor Hits Rock Bottom." The photo was of Alastair Finch. He was almost unrecognizable. The handsome, arrogant face was gone, replaced by a puffy, unshaven visage. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a stained, ill-fitting uniform of a parking lot attendant. He was standing in the rain, a ticket book in his hand, arguing with the driver of a luxury car, a car that had probably once been his own. The article detailed his complete and total downfall. His medical license had been permanently revoked. His father, embroiled in the scandal and facing pressure from powerful new enemies, had been forced off the hospital board and had publicly disowned him. A slew of malpractice lawsuits had wiped out his fortune. He had lost everything: his career, his money, his status, his very identity. He was now the ghost, haunting a parking garage, a bitter shade in a world that had forgotten him. Evelyn stared at the photo for a long moment. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity. Just a quiet, clinical finality. He wasn't a monster. He was just a hollow man, and the world had finally seen his emptiness. She handed the tablet back to Sarah. "Irrelevant," she said softly. Just then, the distinctive whump, whump, whump of a helicopter filled the air. It was a civilian life flight, bringing in a critical patient from a rural accident,
It descended towards the helipad on the roof.
the one her pavehawks had ignored. Evelyn watched it, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. The world was full of storms, full of collapses and chaos. It was full of people who needed help. Her war wasn't over. It had just changed locations. The limping ghost was gone, but Angel 6 was on duty. And she wasn't going anywhere.